It's 100% showing off.
That's right.
But
If I
sometimes,
could do
look, dude, if you ain't tooting your own horn, you just might have a dead battery. So,
preach, we would like to welcome everyone
oh,
to the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Your hosts are Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajedo. And, well, we hit the milestone of 250 last week, and we're, I believe, episode 251.
251. Yes, sir.
That represents a lot. Every now and then I go back and review just to
Mhm.
see how our personalities interact on the subjects we're talking about, or the subjects that we're talking about. And it's an interesting thing because we have certain habits. I've mentioned that before, but of how we interact. But it's just amazing to me to see. It's kind of like an ongoing conversation about everything. It's
It
so
is.
Yeah, it's so interesting. At least the reflection part of it. Now I'm trying to say, here I am, one of the hosts of the show, saying, "Man, it's so fun. It's so interesting. This show's."
Well,
I'm being reflective.
but there's a lot to unpack there because you and I have changed, you know. Um, when you stop and figure it out, 250, this is 251. There's 52 weeks in a year. That's a little over 4 years because we have missed a couple. We've postponed a couple. We haven't done it every single week, but we've come pretty ding dong close. And that's a lot of, our interests changed, our changes, our interests change, our perspectives change, you know. And so going back and looking at some of the old stuff, and it's like, holy cow, is that what I said? That kind of thing. And I've
Yeah,
been wrong on a number of things.
you've been wrong on so many things, and I've been
Yes,
right
I
on
have.
so many. It's not even fair, man. No, it's not that. I know what you're saying. Um, it's
Well,
more like in
I
an
wasn't going to throw you under the bus, so I
no, I know,
amused myself.
and then I took the advantage to make the little joke. Um, but the thing is, it's kind of like life is, and so behind closed doors, if
Hmm.
we're having a conversation
Yeah.
and we say something that's wrong,
Hmm.
or due to okay, I'll say it like this: the key is we're all going to be wrong multiple times across
Oh yeah.
time, but do we update our freaking memory banks
Hmm.
as we go? Because we have to start with questions and bouncing back and forth, and then we have to say, well, wait a second, maybe this, no, maybe yes. That's normal. What's
Hmm.
not normal, or no, I'm sorry, this is not normal. What is normal is to deny,
Yeah.
or double down. Now you can
Or
have some of that,
or
but
I told you so.
yeah, I, I like I told you so's. Um, I mean, not overly. I like I told you so's, not for. There is some ego in that, in the I told you so's, but I like I told you so's to revisit and to refresh the
Well, sometimes new
top.
information comes along and you have to adapt. You have to kind of, when
Yeah,
when COVID first hit, everybody was thinking, "Oh man, this is a joke." Because that's what we were being told. This is a joke. It's just like a cold. It's just like the flu. Well, then people started dying, and it's like, well, wait a minute. No, this is serious stuff. And we did have to adjust and we did have to kind of change a little bit. I still think our reaction in many ways was wrong. Now, I don't mean our personal reaction, I mean we as a society. I still think we did a lot of things wrong, but that's just my opinion.
you don't want to
But
hear my opinion.
but we had to adapt as more information came in, and I think if you're going to be intellectually honest, you have to do that on most things.
Most people I've avoided it even since we started this podcast, but before. My
Mhm.
attitude, I don't know if you've observed my attitude. Yes, it's tempting
Mhm.
to say, you know, this is how this is.
Mhm.
But I don't even know how to lay this out. Okay, I've noticed and I avoid it. There's a lot of bull crap going around with
Mhm.
people on a continuous basis. I I have my judgment calls on a moment by moment basis in terms of if I make a turn signal and the guy cuts me off, I'm pissed and I judge that person immediately. Or
Mhm.
somebody treats me a little bit not fair at a place, or makes me wait when they shouldn't, or not paying attention. But when it comes to big questions, when I'm being judgmental,
Mhm.
I know as I'm being judgmental that I'm being judgmental, and I know not to stamp that with a stamp of approval. So when it comes to big questions and stuff, however, I don't know if other people do the same thing because I'm not in their headspace. But it seems like people make judgment calls and
Oh,
stamp.
sure they do. Yeah, that's human nature. We all make judgments every second of every day.
No, but in my assumption is, and I don't know that this is true, are people making judgment calls, stamping it, and closing that book cover and saying, "Yeah, that's how that is," without further? It feels like that's what people do on a endless list of things. They make the judgment call based on minimal details, stamp it, close the page, and then anytime they reach out to reference that in any other future situation, their conclusion based on a limited amount, which we all have to do, but I'm saying like they cut it off at the pass.
Well,
There's no further information added, regardless of how
they're
correct.
not interested. They're not interested in any further information. Their mind is made up. Don't confuse me with the facts.
I see that, or at least that's the assumption. Now, I'm not saying, because if I say that, then I'm saying, well, but I don't do that. Well, in the ways that I realize I don't do it, I don't do it. All the other ways that I don't realize, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. But we're all that way. I mean, people are people. That's what I and I know I keep saying that, and I know a lot of people are probably tired of hearing it. But that's part of being a human being. There are certain things you're going to make snap judgments about. There are certain things you're not. You know, um, and nobody is perfect because perfection is an abstract thing. It's very subjective. So you know, as open-minded as we try to think we are, there are certain subjects if they come up we don't want to hear it, or we've already made up our mind about it. And if you are intellectually honest, you'll take in new information on it, and maybe you will change your mind about it. But too many people are caught up in the egocentric part about it. I can't admit I'm wrong. The hardest person to admit you're wrong to is the person in the mirror, because that can blow apart your entire ideology, your entire way of thinking, to admit that you're wrong. Oh no, I couldn't be wrong.
There are small things that are small things. And how do you measure that anyhow? But
Yeah, it's all
when it
subjective.
when it comes to big questions, the assumption I rule base on, or base it on, is that one has to be careful, more so the more encompassing of a topic.
Mhm.
Oh, I splintered a nail. That's one thing, or which is actually quite crappy. I don't know if you've ever cut your nail in a way where it goes too much into the cuticle.
Yeah, and folds over backwards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and now you're
it only
yeah.
hurts for about a year and a half.
So that's one thing with its. But on these big, I noticed that people, and especially in things like politics and religion and all these things. Um, uh, it's the truth to the extent that a truth or a clearer view of what it is can be had, they can't be bothered.
Yeah, it's uninformed people. Let's just take a small microcosm of that. Too many people are willing to believe what they read on social media. And you can prove that to yourself if you just keep an eye on your feed on Facebook, for example. How many times have you seen that post that says Facebook is going to start charging to use the service?
Yeah,
Or I don't consent to allow Facebook to gather information from me. All of that stuff has been going around for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and it's all a bunch of BS. But somebody will come across it, won't do any looking into it, won't research any of it, just go, oh, no, I don't consent to them using my information either. So I'm going to post that on my wall so they can't do it. It's like, hello, where have you been? Just a
people.
cursory search, you know?
Well, we are naive. Let me say it as correct as possible. Under the category of human beings. See, because if I said we are naive and then we move on, um, people can interpret that in many ways.
That's fine.
Um, no, I know, but people can interpret it. But I want to be specific about what I'm saying as to exactly what I'm saying. And if you wanted to be specific, um, like out there in any situation, if you say, "Oh, I'm not hungry," the person receiving it, obviously that just means I'm not hungry.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be anything, and if you have a short little answer, it could mean all sorts of crazy stuff to the person because you don't know what's in people's heads. So
I'm sorry, but we're treading on dangerous ground here.
no,
We're
you
treading on very dangerous ground because if I'm hesitating to say it because I don't want to start some trouble here,
no
but
say
have
it, say it.
you ever been out with a girl and said,
Yeah,
"Oh, did you want some dessert?" And she said no, and then she just promptly ate 3/4 of yours?
that's
So
not
when
no.
somebody says, "I'm not hungry," it's like, yeah, you're not hungry. What do you want? Where do you want to go eat? You know, you're hungry or you wouldn't have brought it up.
Well, so under the category of human beings,
Mhm.
we are all capable of these things such as error and assumptions and all this.
Mhm.
But kind of like Star Trek's The Medical Room,
Mhm.
where it had the vital signs that went up and down.
Yeah.
You know, humans under the categories have many of those variables.
Oh, sure.
Um, one may have more of one thing or less of the other, and there's all these combinations and stuff. Um, so we're prone to be naive
Mhm.
in terms of when I said that,
Mhm.
and some more or less at
Right.
any given time and throughout the course of a day or a week or a month or a year, can we really live? My question to you, without trusting, without knowing.
Well, trust is a hard thing because to me, trust has to be earned. I'm willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, okay, unless you've proven that you don't deserve that. But trust is a hard thing, and I guess it also depends on your level of cynicism and your level of experience. Because if somebody is just talking absolute bollocks, and you know it because you yourself are well versed in whatever they're talking about, and they're making several just, I mean, factual errors, that can be, that can be cleared up. But if you're not well educated on a topic, I mean, you said naive. Um, we're all naive to a certain extent in certain things, and we're all ignorant to a certain extent on a multitude of other things. But I guess it's more your reaction to it than anything else. to where if somebody tries to, if you're talking about something and they try to, well, no, it's actually, it goes like this, and this, your reaction is what determines my reaction to that. It's simply if you, oh, okay, well, see, now I thought it was this and this. Well, yeah, it was one of these, but not the other. Oh, all right. That's a discussion. That's a conversation. But it's just, oh, bull, you're wrong, and yada, yada, yada. And this guy and that. I got no time for you.
Okay, so that's all fair. Although I have to re-say my question because I said it not sufficient.
Okay.
Although all that you said is on the level, and I agree with it because I went down that road of what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked it insufficient, and here's the thing. I'll restate it, and I realized it once you started answering and you went into this other
Mm-hmm.
area of the same thing, but a side road of it.
Okay.
Let me rephrase it better. See
Okay.
if it can come. What I was trying to say. This is the rephrasing. Throughout the course of a year, you and
Mm-hmm.
I and anybody, just a human being, is it unreasonable? I'm trying to say it. I'm trying to say it so that I get back the answer. Um, Not that I'm looking for, but that you get what I'm trying to say. Is it reasonable that people in general, throughout the course of the year, with so much information, be
Mm-hmm.
it news or just daily things or this or that, that a human could exist that year free of not falling into naivety,
Naivete, yeah.
naivete? Is it possible? Because don't we have to, or is it true or is it not true that to get on with it, which we have touched on before, even if we're being rigid, we have to accept a lot of errors and fallacies incoming
Yeah.
from people and such.
Yeah.
We can't address it all. So is it could we spend a year without accepting, because I do it. I think everybody does it. That's my answer, but so that's my question.
Yeah, big time. And I think it's fairly easy to do just by the sheer volume of stuff we have coming at us, because it comes at us from all different directions. And where it used to be, we were more focused locally, then we became focused nationally, and now it's worldwide. We're hearing stories from, well, I'll give you an example. All the volcanic activity in the Canary Islands. I've heard more about the Canary Islands, not from you, just from national news sources. I've heard more about the volcanoes on the Canary Islands in the last 5 years than I had in the previous 45. Okay. So it is that instantaneous. If there is a wildfire in Australia, we hear about it right now. And it didn't used to be that way. It may have been in the paper 4, 5, 6 days after the fact, but very rarely would it even be talked about. But because we have such instant communication now, we have such a huge flood of stuff coming in that I think you have to disconnect yourself a little bit. Otherwise, how do you keep up? So I think it is easy to fall into naivete, and it's very easy to remain ignorant because you just can't process everything. Something really has to be special and stand out for you to want to go research it further. If you remember what that thing was, you know? So, yeah, I do think so. I think it's very easy to fall into that.
I
Just
think
simply
so.
because I think a lot of people also try to avoid it,
Avoid what?
avoid all that information coming in,
I
you know?
think a lot of people don't even. It's unfortunate for me to say at this point, but and we all have, like you said, the focus. So it depends on.
Mhm.
But and we can't. There's no way, with all the information like you're saying, there's no way. There's
Well,
too much. There's billions of people on Earth,
mhm.
and there's X amount of disciplines, and things that those discoveries in those disciplines affect in terms of updating what man knows, humans
Mhm.
know, um, for there to even be enough. It's kind of like your MP3 player full of like 200,000 hours of songs. You know what I'm saying? There's
I
no
do.
way you can properly enjoy such things
Yeah.
because there's too much of it.
But look at how we used to, using your example of the MP3 player, look at how we used to consume our music. It was on FM radio, or previous to that, AM radio. So you had a mixture of music and advertisements and news and little things that the DJ would say in between songs. And so you got, whether you knew it or not, you got a certain amount of information that way. Now we're not even doing that. Now it's a Spotify playlist. We consume what we want when we want, and we don't need that DJ. We don't need those advertisements. We don't need that newscast. So there's a lot of information by doing that. We're eliminating a lot of that input that we don't see as necessary. That may keep us ignorant as to what's going on around us. But then again, it's another way of unplugging and deciding, no, thanks, I don't want to partake.
Yeah. In my world, for the past few years, my main focuses has been genealogy research, and as a
Mhm.
derivative of that, extracurricular history
Mhm.
research,
Mhm.
which surprisingly breaks away from just by the normal twists and turns of the plot, twists away from the specific place that you're studying, and you end up in places like, um, I don't know, Florida, Louisiana, hell, California, just everywhere, Mexico,
Mhm.
um, the Netherlands, and you just start. Why? Because one thing, it's what you could, in theory, connect everything to everything else.
Yeah.
Like you could literally do that, and you could do it good. You could do it well. It could be done. You could literally connect everything to everything else, topic wise.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, sometimes it takes a little bit of karate gymnastics to do, but you could do that because, in fact, since we're all on this planet, um, everything kind of is connected. I mean, it just depends on what level one wants
Yeah.
to investigate and whatnot. But
And which direction they want to take it.
yeah,
And which direction that they want to take it. Because I'll give you an example. A lot of people have said, and I said it myself back in the day, what good does it do to explore space? Why did we bother to send a guy to the moon? Yeah, okay, great. It was a terrific accomplishment. But what did we get out of it? But what most people don't think about is it was that exploration of quantum physics that allowed them to design and develop the equipment that took man to the moon and brought them back safely. Those explorations into quantum physics directly led to the MRI machine, which has saved millions of lives worldwide. So that's just one example of benefits of that kind of exploration, is because we never know where it's going to lead. And it took a guy to go, wait a minute, if magnetism can be directed, could we direct it in towards the medical field? And they found a way to do it. And things that were not diagnosable before have now become diagnosable and can be treated because of it. So, you never know what direction something is going to take you. So, I just, I don't know, man. It's easy to sit back from an uninformed perspective, like of such a person such as myself, and ask these questions, but it takes somebody else to not connect the dots, but know which direction to start looking for dots. Does that make any sense? Or did because I just confused myself.
yeah. There's under that category, there's many branches
Mhm.
that people might not know that result in positive um, results for people due to a certain journey
Mhm.
into a certain area of exploration,
Right.
and it creates a new avenue is what is, and but some people might not um, even.
Well, just to make it more personal, if you hadn't have started down this genealogy journey and then taken the next step and gotten that DNA test, you may have never ventured into the areas of history that you're venturing into now because you really didn't have a need, a want, or a desire to. But then you became interested in it and you've discovered some, I mean, some pretty amazing stuff about your family and about just history in general.
Yeah, it opened up a Pandora. It opened up a bread Panera shop.
Panera box. Yeah, there you go.
It opened up a Panera. Um, uh, bowl in a like a bull in a China shop. I will say this: prior to all that, growing up,
Yeah.
and for the DNA results thing,
Hmm.
even thinking that didn't even exist.
Yeah.
In certain conversations with with my dad, when he would give me a rough estimate of the history of
Hmm.
Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, and he says, "Son, you do know that for 700 years, the Arabs, the Moors, were in Spain for 700 years and stuff." And so and there's no reason for me to doubt my dad. And in fact, that's true what
Sure.
he said. Um, and I didn't make much of it one way or the other. That's just part of the history. And so I took it as what it was, right? Like, okay, that's an interesting. So I figured that we would have Arabic ancestry at some point in time in the past.
Hmm.
And then I took the DNA test, and actually I did it. I called you and Steve
Hmm.
to do it live in front of the thing because I was like, what's going to happen here? Is it going to show up Arab? Is it going to show up this? Is it going to show up that? And it showed all the European that it showed. It's European.
Yeah.
That first test, right? And I was shocked over Portugal,
Hmm.
and I was shocked it had Irish. It had a lot of French back then in that instance.
Yeah.
The only thing that I was, if it would have showed Arab, I would have said, "Oh, okay, this is what my dad said." And it showed Iberian, which I was like, "Oh yeah, well, of course."
Hmm.
But it didn't have none of the other stuff that And you guys kind of were. I remember Steve saying, "Well, but look at all the mix, that's look at all the places you're from, even." Um, and at that point, I didn't know, but I started exploring that because I was like, "What is this about Portugal?"
Hmm.
I mean, it's right next door.
Yeah.
And as the things updated, because they update every year, every whatever,
Hmm. As they get more samples in. Yeah.
yeah, and me studying and stuff, um, I've learned that in fact it is true. Well, it is true because it's true. 700 years the Arabs were in Spain,
Sure.
or in the Iberian Peninsula, um, and now I do have a percent of North African,
Hmm.
but the Spanish had North African prior to any Arab invasion because, in fact, well, what it was that the people of North Africa come from the same population, anciently come from the same population that populated Southern Europe.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, across the Straits of Gibraltar, it's not that far.
no, I'm saying that anciently,
Hmm.
the
But
people that populated everything from
yeah.
the Levant across the Balkans,
Yeah.
um, Italy, and all of North Africa were the same groups of people that
Hmm.
dispersed from, Anatolia and such.
Right.
So anciently they had, but I didn't know. So I had that 1%, right? Um, and I would have figured more, but I didn't know the history of the Canary Islands. That there were indigenous people in the Canary Islands. I didn't know, and so I studied all those things, and it's broadened up the thing. So it's curious the multitude of different. So I have Jewish. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm talking about 1400s.
Sure.
So it's not like
But
around the corner, but back then, Genovese, Jewish people, Norman people,
mhm.
um, all coalesced, and plus many Spanish people, all coalesced, and Portuguese people, all coalesced to form me eventually. So and plus now I have a general idea of the history, so I kind of get it. I get the story.
But the difference is, and you said it yourself, it sparked that curiosity in there to keep digging and go
Well, yeah,
further and further and further. Well, but you know of and you've matched with a lot of people that just they don't even think of that. They got their test. Oh, I'm this much Spanish. I'm this much this. I'm this much that. And then that was it. They never went anywhere with it.
yeah.
I mean, so
Most people don't go as extreme. I mean, I can't say that because there's 8 billion people on Earth, but most people, it appears, don't go as extreme as I have, unless
well,
they have a degree in this thing. But
it was another one of those flash in the pan fads. I mean, there for a while, everybody on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all of that were I say everybody, but I mean a ton of people were getting the 23andMe or the Ancestry or whatever because it was the fashionable thing to do, and then get their DNA test results and say, "Oh, I'm this, 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 and this," and then that's it. So it's kind of it lasted longer than the fidget spinner, but only by about a year and a half. You know.
well, I can tell you sitting here now that I'm as Germanic as anybody across
Mhm.
the frickin' globe
Yeah.
by direct descent, as direct as can be, scientific
Yeah.
Germanic, not even half cocked, not even
Hmm.
this and that. I can tell you I'm Celtic,
Hmm.
full pre-Celtic. I
Hmm.
belong to paternally the people that spread Celtic culture across Europe,
Hmm.
um, way back. Well, in the Swiss Alps,
Hmm.
um, and spread where they came from. I could tell you that,
Hmm.
but I could also tell you that I come from, and that's just the direct father. I could also tell you that I come from, um, documented from indigenous people that were stranded on islands called the Canary Islands prior to the new era. You know,
European exploration. Yeah.
AD 1,
Hmm.
like people that were stranded there in the early times of Roman, where they took these indigenous North Africans and placed them in the. They say they don't know how they got there, but this is the suggestion because they found Roman artifacts there, and they left them there stranded. Who knows what happened? I come from those people. I come from Jewish people that were expelled
Hmm.
or hid their Jewishness
Hmm.
and fled to the Canary Islands.
Yeah.
Um, I come from Portuguese people back in the 1400s that went to the Canary Islands. So I come from all these different people that were living basically in the Iberian
Hmm.
Peninsula. So if you look at it at the level of Iberian, you could say, yeah, it's just all Iberian. But if you look at it at the level of more honed in,
Hmm.
it's little pockets of different, I guess you'd call them, I don't want to call them ethnicities, but they're kind of like little mini cultures and this, and that.
Yeah.
Because, Jewish is Jewish.
Yeah.
Um, and indigenous Guanche people are indigenous Guanche people. Um, so it's kind of like, if you come from all these people, it's like, I mean, it's not like, how can
Well,
I say,
we're mutts. I mean.
back then, I had thousands of direct grandparents.
Hmm.
The math can be done very easily. The tree opened up.
Hmm.
Each one of those existed to create me eventually. But back then, as
Hmm.
opposed to right now, I have had four grandparents.
Hmm.
So you would think this is my little nuclei. But back then, in order for those grandparents to exist, there had to be thousands upon thousands and thousands
Sure,
of ancestors,
sure.
and it's freaking mind blowing stuff.
Yeah, even further, they had to be there. There were thousands and thousands of surviving ancestors,
Mhm.
because when you take into account infant mortality and just regular mortality, just what was the life expectancy? You know, those were the people that survived the plague. They survived the Black Death. They survived the wars. They survived the invasions. So, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, and the last thing I'll say and by the way, I don't consider myself Germanic per se, like in terms of like, but it is the truth of my, it is it is the truth according to the DNA extraction and the
mhm,
test, the same test that your old man took
yeah,
and stuff. That's the truth of the matter.
yeah.
Um, but you wouldn't know that
Mm-mm,
if you didn't do the test, and you wouldn't know none of. I wouldn't know any of it if I wouldn't
mhm.
have, even if I would have done genealogy minus the DNA testing. I wouldn't have known all this extra stuff because without DNA testing, you can only go
Right.
back in your tree to the 1600s properly if you're
Maybe.
lucky,
Yeah, maybe.
right? And even though to me the genealogy part is the thing
Mhm.
because you have the document and so you know someone back in the day wrote it and signed it.
Yes.
So now you have this thing. But the DNA is also a signature. Um, the problem is another thing I've learned there is no such thing as Spanish DNA.
Mhm.
There is no such thing as British DNA at all, or even African DNA for that matter. Now it's kind of a little bit of a wordplay, but it is an important thing that most people leave out and don't deal with for mainly for two reasons. One, this is unfortunate, but I'll say they're incapable of. I'm gonna say it's unfortunate, but it appears at least it appears they're incapable of understanding it. Or two, because it is kind of in the weeds, and I'm kind of
Yeah,
at
you can get pretty down in the weeds into this, and it doesn't take long before you run across words you have to start looking up.
but there's two reasons why people won't even bother with this aspect of it is and it's I'll explain. One, maybe they're just simply incapable or like what we say they might not be interested, but I think it's incapable. Many people are not.
They don't want to do the work. Yeah.
It's too convoluted. But the second thing is ancestry and all these testing sites had made decisions early on to qualify regions
Mhm.
with percentages of DNA because most people you cannot tell them that they belong to the Urnfield culture, that they're descended from the Yamnaya,
Mhm.
that split off and went south as opposed to north. You can't do that because most people just want to know if they're British,
Yeah.
if they're Swiss, or if they're whatever. Um, and the other stuff is kind of like now you have to read
Yeah. They don't
books
want
to
to do the
even
work. Yeah.
understand what's going on. Well, but the truth is, if they just removed all those percentages, because those are placeholders, in reality, we're much more smaller divided. So we're like little pieces from other places
Oh yeah.
that coalesce, and it's shown in our DNA.
Hmm.
So this whole mixing thing is a fact, um, regardless of looks
Hmm.
and color, and all these things. That's not. It is true that people coalesce in one area, had babies in one area, and produced very white people, or very dark people, or very whatever, because they kept repeating,
Hmm.
and genes kept reproducing in that. But it doesn't mean that they're one. It means they're one group in one way, but in a genetic way, it's just all the same DNA being reshuffled in different places from an original
Yeah.
source. So, anyways,
Yeah.
long story short, it's a huge rabbit hole.
Oh, big time. Well, along these lines, I told you back in the green room before we pushed the button and went live that I just had this goofy thing that's been around for a while, but I just heard about it. And I kind of feel like I've had my head in the sand, but then again, I do that a lot by choice. But have you ever heard of people having their dogs DNA tested?
Hmm.
You have heard of that.
Hmm.
I heard about it and I thought, nah. And then I thought, well, what's to what benefit? And then I thought of a couple three right off the bat. Well, I mean, but it turns out they started doing it in 2007.
I've heard of it.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that people got their dog's DNA tested. And my initial reaction was, why? It's your dog. But then I thought, well, let's say you paid $1,500 for a purebred golden retriever. Would you like to make sure that that dog is a golden retriever? And all the research I've done, which I got to admit, limited, about an hour's worth, most of these DNA tests only go back about 3 generations. Okay.
The doggy ones?
Yes. They only go back about 3 generations. But that's usually enough to say, oh, nope, there was a St. Bernard in there too. So it's not a purebred golden, at least not 3 generations back. So I could see, you're going to make an investment in a dog for a show dog or something like that. And yeah, you want to make sure that that's your if you're going to pay $1,500 for a pup, you want to make sure you're getting what you're paying for. I can see that.
Vigo's a pure-blooded
Beagle.
beagle, and I have his family chart.
Mhm.
He harkens back to Tennessee, or
Mhm.
actually, I'm sorry, Kentucky.
Mhm.
So he's Kentucky blue blood. And I know his mother's and grandparents and great grandparents' names
Mhm.
because they're all bred in farms.
Yeah. We got an English Springer Spaniel when we lived over in Hawaii that came from Australia, and that dog had a better pedigree than most of the people I know. But he was just this big brown and white goofy dog. We had papers. I mean, the guy, he got the dog and they were getting ready to transfer and they couldn't keep him. So they kept trying to sell him to us. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy a dog. There are too many dogs out there being thrown away. No,
Yeah.
I don't do that. And finally he said, look, I know you'll give him a good home. Will you give me a couple of bucks for the papers? And I'm like, okay, well, the papers are not really that important to me, but okay, sure. So we went ahead and we took him. He's a good dog. I mean, sweetest thing you'd ever want to meet. But so I can see wanting to protect an investment, something like that. But the other one is just plain curiosity. I mean, when you say, well, like the last little yellow lab we had, she was yellow lab mixed with something else, but we don't know what the hell. I mean, she was one of those mixtures where even the vet don't know what you got. All they can tell you is it's not a monkey, but that's about it. I wouldn't have been surprised to find out she was part Dodge Dart. Okay. So I can see a little bit of curiosity there, but $200 worth, I don't know that I was that curious to find out what she actually was.
I often think under this topic whenever it comes up because I have thought of it because
Uh-huh.
I live with my doggy,
Sure.
and he's here in Sweetwater,
Mhm.
but he's a Kentucky guy, and so I always think creatively, or jokingly in my head. In reality, if he would have never left home,
Uh-huh.
he'd be over there with their accent,
Chasing
whatever,
horses around in the pasture.
right? Kind of a country guy,
Mhm.
and here he's become this. If he could drink Cuban coffee, because in his experience growing up, all he knows is
Mhm.
the Spanish world, the Cuban world of Miami. Um, People talk to him in that fashion when walking. So his little world. So he doesn't. He under the. I wonder if he says in his mind, you know, sure, this is my home, has been, but you know, I do hark from Kentucky, don't you? As he's walking down
Mhm.
the little path, I wonder if he even, or in his mind, it's kind of like, well, whatever. You get the point. It's kind
I
of fun.
do. I do, because I had the same thing about Sam. I mean, our Springer Spaniel. Just a simple case of the dog was bred in Australia, brought to Hawaii. That's culture shock right there. And then taken to the Nevada desert. The first time the dog discovered snow and cows on the same day. And you could just see the fuses blow in that dog's little brain, because it was just too much to take in. Because it was the fact that, an example, um, we were staying in a little single wide trailer, right, in this trailer park. We had just gotten there. We didn't even have our furniture delivered yet because we knew this place was temporary. And you had the front door was up in front by the living room. The back door was way down at the other end of the place. But they both led out to the same yard. We let him out to go to the bathroom, and it was dark early in the morning. Oh my God, 6 in the morning or something like that. Sun was still down. It was the dead of winter, and it had snowed overnight, about 6 inches of snow. And he comes busting out that door. Open the door. He comes busting out the door, runs out into the yard, gets about 4 steps out, stops, looks down, spins around, and looks at me like, "What the hell did you do?" Comes running back up onto the patio, up the steps, into the house, down the other end to the other door, wanting out that one, thinking it's going to be different, right? I open up that door. He goes busting out into the same yard, spun around and looked at me like, "It's out here too. What the hell did you do?" You know, just one of those things. It
He
was
got excited and
weird.
happy.
Yeah, he didn't know what the hell was going on. Well, the back fence of that yard was a wire fence. Well, there was cattle on the other side. Well, they saw this dog come running out a couple of times and running around in the yard. I picked up snow, made a snowball, and threw it, and that was fun. But there was a ball he couldn't find. You know, they come up towards the fence, and one of them mooed at him, and you could just see that final fuse in that braid just said, and he vapor locked right there. Holy cow, that's the biggest damn thing I've ever seen in my life. Ran around behind me, stuck his head around my legs, and barked once. And it's like, "Oh, Billy Badass. Now you're Mr. Badass standing behind me." You know,
That's so funny.
it was just the culture shock, I guess you could say, the climate shock of going from Australia to Hawaii,
Yeah.
where it was never cold. And then all of a sudden, here it was cold, and holy shit, what's that? You know?
I mean, they're incredible though, and
Mm-hmm.
they've been with us
Mm-hmm.
since time
Oh, yeah.
immemorial. Um, which is another thing that I really have a sense of that. I can't never in my life have ever looked at a dog and not felt a. I mean, obviously they have different personalities,
Sure.
but like in a general sense, felt not. I've never not looked at a dog and not felt an instant, um, deep understand. Shallow as it may be, but like some sort of like understand, like yeah. Either way, you're part of our tribe. A
Mm-hmm.
feeling like that.
Yeah.
I don't know
It's
what it is. It's
it's one of the few animals on earth that it it just belongs.
they just belong,
They just belong.
and they probably, and they probably think there's probably a convention somewhere out in Las Vegas, and they say,
Mm-hmm.
"Yep, we fooled them again this year
Yeah, really. But then again,
with a paw print for their diplomas."
yeah,
I
exactly.
I fooled humans this year.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. They say that the dog is the only animal that loves you more than it loves itself.
It's so true.
And in some ways you can kind of see that. But let me ask you this about that, because I
But
brought up
they love food better than both themselves and humans.
no, but they love you because you provide the food.
Well, yeah,
You know, see, that's the difference between dogs and cats. The dog will say, man, they look after me, they take care of me, they feed me, they are gods.
Cats
Cats
are
look at you and they say, they look after me, they take care of me, they feed me, I must be a god.
cats don't even pretend.
No, they don't. They don't. I think cats are evil. I really do. They are. They're jerks. Cats are jerks. And that's all there are. That's all they are. They're jerks. You know. But we got into the. I know we kind of really digressed from it, but that's okay. I talked about kind of protecting an investment on a show dog or something like that, or a supposedly purebred dog. But let's say you did get Vigo's DNA test and it turns out he wasn't purebred. Would you love him any less? He's part of the family, man.
I would level with him. I'd sit him down
Yeah.
and I'd say, "Listen, Vigo, I've got some news to break.
Yeah. You're adopted.
You know, in Roman times, with that said,
Hmm.
many of the next of kin did not become emperors and such. They were picked. Um, so it could be a what do you call it? It could be a stepson, or it could be a um, just a cousin or some sort of whatever.
Hmm.
So it didn't always follow the line of descent. But since we're talking about that, but once the empire fell, and the Germanics won. Oh well, Rome
The
went.
barbarians won. Yeah.
Rome went to. Well, no, they were the Germanics,
Hmm.
and you can say they were barbarians.
Well,
And you
that's
can
what the
also,
Romans. That's what the Romans called them. They said anybody that wasn't a Roman was a barbarian. So.
yeah, they were all barbarian, and frankly,
Hmm.
um, we're both of them. Maybe me more. Well, not that I
Oh
can't
yeah,
even
that
say
was a
that.
few centuries ago. So.
But we belong. They are both sides are part of
Hmm.
our history.
Sure.
Um, just flat out. So it's kind of a difficult thing to play favorites.
Sure.
But once they Rome fell and these guys came in
Hmm.
and they started to establish little power regions of themselves of their own, they started handing it over to their sons in succession,
Hmm.
and out of that came the kings of old here, in
Hmm.
recent 500, 600 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a tradition of passing on the buck like that.
Sure.
But in
Passing the
some
torch. Yeah.
but in some cases that wasn't the case, and they pass it on to the most suitable in their opinion at the time. Um, and they were loved too. And just
Hmm.
like our little doggies, even though they're adopted, there's the bond is there. It's like an incredible thing. It's
Uh,
incredible.
that is. Have you heard about this in Japan? Talking about adoption and people and passing things on to their son. There is a tradition in Japan, and it's still practiced to this very day.
Eyeball licking.
No,
Okay.
of adopting adults to carry on the family business. Like the head of Suzuki, the head of Toyota, they were adopted by their parents as adults. Those parents, that father, who was the former head of Suzuki, Toyota, and a couple of other companies, were adopted by their parents. They aren't actually blood relatives. It is common for large business owners over there to adopt a 28 or 35-year-old to carry on and take on the family name to take over the business when father finally retires. And they make no excuses for it. It just is. And it still happens to this day.
Very
So
interesting.
I mentioned Toyota and Suzuki because I was reading the article that I read about this a few months ago. talked specifically about those two companies and how both of those people were not blood relatives of their quote unquote fathers who passed the business down to them. And they weren't blood relatives of the people who passed the business down to them. There are, in some cases, it does go to blood relative, but they have taken on that family name and keep it going.
Very interesting. In the West, we have other leanings.
Yeah.
In a broad sense, we have other leanings in terms of that. But if your child is adopted, then they're your child,
Sure.
and that's who gets, the goodies, let's say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they wouldn't, in general, pass up their children if they have them for someone crossed away. That's not
Well,
very. That's not an American thing.
no, that's not an American thing, but there are cases in Japan where they would ask the person to be adopted over their own children because they didn't think their own children could handle the business or they weren't the right type. It doesn't mean that they're written out of the will or anything like that, but you're going to be the beneficiaries of my will, but this guy I'm adopting is going to take over the family business. That's pretty common.
Confidence.
It's just a yeah, and that's exactly what it is competence.
Yeah.
So
Not that it matters either way at the end of the day.
well, not to us. I mean, it might matter to little Johnny who thought he was going to take over the business, but I mean, if dad doesn't think you're up to it,
No, I'm saying
you wasn't going to get it anyway. So
that to dad, it doesn't. It's by hook or crook.
But they still want it in that family name, so they had actually adopt this businessman so that it will stay in the family name.
And some of those old Spanish um, baptisms or death um,
certificates,
mm-hmm. Because it was is a Catholic country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they have certain things, but the person will die. But previous to that, they would write their will.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that in the death certificate, they refer to where that will document is located and who the scribe was that filled in, or the notary that did that, so that there's a thing. But they would leave instructions in that death certificate that they, or I'm sorry, from the will over into the death certificate, that would say things like, and I want a rosary or a mass to be performed under this saint, and I want this, and they'll lay it out. And it's an interesting thing because these people, they lived in the world that they lived in these little hamlets in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by mountains, and they had little churches, and then they had their main church wherever that was in town, in the center of that town. And this was a very important thing because people died very quickly, sometimes back
and
to
very
back.
young, yeah.
And sometimes kids were left orphaned, and just all sorts of things. And it's an interesting, the documentation of leaving these details generation for generation.
Yeah.
Just, something, food for thought.
And that's when and that's one reason why the whole surname thing came along and why it became so important to document this was for the disposition of property upon someone's death. Because it was harder to prove who you were. Well, there was no ID cards. So by having everything documented, the laws of the land could be followed and the correct dispersal of the estate could be done. but that really wasn't seen until about the 1100s, because it was one thing to be Robert from wherever, but how many Roberts were from wherever? You know, chances are you were not the only Robert from that location. So they had to start giving surnames and start breaking things down.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they did do that. Um, that's how it was
oh
more
my
messy
God.
than what people or that what I was willing to accept for
Hmm.
a few years until recently
Hmm.
it was like maybe the last couple of years it was very difficult for me to accept the idea that a surname could be different from one generation to the other.
Yeah.
I mean, I understood that existed,
Hmm.
but I had trouble with it incorporating it because it's such a strong link to be able to say
Well,
one name following the others following the other.
you were always taught that that's the correct way it's done. My last name is Say, and emphasis was always placed on that A, because another real common spelling is EY. Some would argue it's more common, but they're about 50-50. And it's very easy for people to spell it with an E because that's what they've seen. But who's to say that one is right and one isn't? You know, the organizations that keep track of such things, they accept about 15 different spellings of that last name. I've seen some really weird stuff.
I
Weird
was
to me, but to the people who have their name spelled that way, it's not weird.
I was on a woodworking podcast recently,
Hmm.
and on my little name badge, I
Hmm.
added my name with an X instead of a
Hmm.
G.
Yeah.
And the gentleman asked me, he's a friend of all of ours, but he asked me, well, why did you put an X in your name? And I explained that, well, lettering or writing of names were not solidified like we have them now. So let's say you had one guy with a surname
Hmm.
and he went in to do business in one town but lived in another. They could document his name, same surname, but with two different variations.
Hmm.
Or likewise, he has a child, and instead of an X or instead of a G, they'd write a J
Hmm.
or they'd write an X in the case of my thing. It's the same family, but and by the way, this is not the only thing. It could in fact be in some cases that they were different families, but
Sure.
um, even within the point is that even within the case of within the same family,
Yeah.
you would have alterations in the way people spelled things because it's not like writing canon was canon in terms of every single detail
Right.
necessarily. There was variations and some spelled things phonetically, and so that's
Hmm.
why a lot of the variations we have today occurred due to that one aspect and another one that one aspect and there's other reasons too, like maybe somebody, I mean, there's other reasons. We'll just leave it at that. But that's one reason. And so I said that, but one guy in that group in that show said, "Well, people didn't they know how to spell or figure out how to write?"
No.
And that's why I explained because it's not. It was something that was everywhere, ubiquitous. It
Hmm.
was something that all people did.
Yeah.
Because it's not like we're living in a different world today. Things are
Yeah.
set more in concrete in certain ways.
Yeah. It's rare to find the person who can't read or write, whereas just a couple hundred years ago, it was rare to find the person who could, you know?
I don't. I don't. Still. We've had that conversation. I still have. I mean, it depends on how we're looking at it, but I still have problems with that. I know that it was more than we have today for sure by a
Mhm.
lot, but I feel
I mean,
like. Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
my 5 times grandfather, when he got his Civil War when he got his Revolutionary War pension, when the documents were all done and everything, he signed it with an X and had to have somebody witness that that was actually him signing it. These were subsistence farmers. They couldn't read or write. They could add up on their fingers and toes and maybe draw lines in the dirt, but they couldn't read or write. That was very common. I won't say it was the majority of people, but it was very common. And you go back a few more 100 years, and the only people who could read or write were the scholars and the monks and the priests, and they were the people that kept track of everything. Folks knew how to say their name, but very few knew how to write it. And the further back you go, the more prevalent that was.
Well, I can agree. I can. I haven't even looked into. I mean, I've seen some
Mhm.
information, but I've not delved into it. But I can agree that the further back we go, the less and less reading
Mhm.
and writing is common, because it's an obvious giveaway. It's an obvious due to the many circumstances that you mentioned. It's an
Mhm.
obvious one, and hence that's many cases. Maybe that's why they needed scribes and people to register um, the
Yeah.
documents for villages and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the reason I say I put a question mark on it is that they've found 1,000-year kid school um, school kid itineraries
Mhm.
where kids went to school and there's obvious writing and such. And we do know that places like, well, there was schools in Rome,
Mhm.
and you would say maybe it's just the elite, although that was more so the case, obviously.
Mhm.
But in many cases that wasn't the case. But I could agree that the majority of the population probably couldn't read, other than if they're lucky, maybe their name, like you said. But
Okay.
there's still sort of variation there that I haven't looked into.
I have here just in one particular website. It's called Colonial Quills, and the article is on literacy in colonial America. It said literacy was higher in New England and the Mid Atlantic colonies than it was in the South. Okay, it was also higher in cities than it was in the more rural areas. In New England, the literacy rate was 60% between 1650 and 1670. In Virginia, it was 54%. For women, it was 45%. So I guess it was regional as well as what was seen as the priority. How important is it for your kids to learn to read or write? Now, Boston bragged that their literacy was about 97%, their literacy rate. And in fact, there was a law passed by them. Let's see. Um, in 1642, the New England law stated, see that all youth under family government be taught to read perfectly in the English tongue. It was called the Old Deluder Act, which called for establishing grammar schools. So it was seen as something important by that time. But
I
even
mean,
then, you're only talking about 60%, as they said.
well, yeah, I mean, there were universities built
Sure.
in the Americas
Mm-hmm.
since the 1500s.
Yeah.
Um, like multiple ones
Yeah.
across South America, Central America, the Caribbean.
Right. And that's where lawyers and doctors and such came from. But
Well, but let me finish my thing so you
sure.
get the half other part of it.
Sure.
Um, they weren't even just for your regular your the native people were in those universities.
Mhm.
They built universities where natives attended,
Mhm.
along with other just everybody
Mhm.
since the 1500s.
Mhm.
So I would assume that these were the more privileged, even in that scenario,
Mhm.
as people in the country or out in the wilderness wouldn't have
Mhm.
the. But I feel like I haven't looked into it enough to be able to say, but just that fact, there was an acknowledgement of knowledge in
Yes.
terms of that for hundreds of years. I mean, like I said, even the Greeks, for goodness sakes, they would.
Well,
But I don't know that it was the majority of the. I would agree it's not the majority of the population. And 60% in some colonies
mhm.
or states by that time, that's not bad.
Well, this was in 16. Um, oh, okay. No, I take that back. That was, 1731 to 1800. Um, yes.
I know that people in
Now,
Cuba traveled. There's accounts of there's registers in universities of here in the United States
mhm,
with all the student body coming from other parts of the world, such as
right.
Cuba. They would send their kids, but these were the more wealthy or financially. So there was an interest.
There was, but it was a different, it came from a different point of view. It came from a different direction. I can't think of the word. 1647, the Massachusetts General Court passed the Old Deluder Act, calling for the establishment of grammar schools. One, to thwart the chief project of that old deluder, Satan, to keep men from knowledge of the scriptures. So they wanted people to learn to read so they could read the Bible. Because remember, this is the 1600s now. 1647, this act was passed. They were there, very religious societies, and they wanted the kids to learn to read so they could read the Bible to thwart that old deluder, Satan. So the emphasis was there for a completely different reason than what you and I think.
Well,
Yeah, some weird stuff.
I don't know that that's weird though.
Well, no, for them it was perfectly normal. For us, that the emphasis being there for that reason is strange. But for them, it was appropriate at the time.
It's
You
not
know,
strange in my mind. I don't know it's if it would be strange for even you that they would focus on for reading, especially with. I don't find it strange. I don't can't see that you would find it strange. But
I,
that's
I,
not
I,
the.
I, I don't find it strange for them at that time. I would find it strange today.
Oh, if it were.
You want your kid to learn to read so they can know how to read the Bible. That may be one side benefit, but that wouldn't be the main reason you wanted them to learn. But this was the main reason that the general court of the colony of Massachusetts wanted kids to learn to read, and why they made education mandatory, why they made grammar schools.
I'm even having trouble with that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with it, and I could list. Look, there was there had, if I had to bet money, there was multiple reasons in Massachusetts and maybe other colonies. I could see that being the emphasis, but there's no way. Imagine kids out in the country and stuff. They're afraid that they'll get, especially the different denominations, that they would get led astray and such because they don't have a way to defend themselves from lies from other religions and whatnot, and this and that. I could see that 100%. But in light of there being, I don't even know when the first universities were built in the United States, but I'm sure it was early on. Um, they weren't built just for religion; they were built for attorneys,
Oh yeah.
medical. They were built for all sorts of. So I just feel like I don't know. I don't know.
The first U.S. university was Harvard, built in 1636 in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So, but that's a quote taken directly from this law that was passed in um, in 1647 by the Massachusetts General Court. That was their reason for ordering grammar schools to be created.
I mean, but you can see that concurrently with that,
Mhm.
there were people going to school for all sorts of things
Oh, sure,
that didn't have to do with religion. So
sure.
you see what I'm saying, though. I'm not
Mhm.
trying to. Um, I'm trying to balance it actually with okay, there's that, and I guess they figured poor people wouldn't amount to much more than what they had, so they might as well
Yeah.
focus on this.
Well,
But it's
and the emphasis was placed on literacy, not so much writing, although they did want you to learn how to write as well, but more emphasis was placed on you learning to read. And in fact, the old this sound patronizing as hell, and it is. Um, you've seen the old samplers, the hand stitched samplers with all the alphabet and the numbers all the way around it. That was
mm,
seen as a way for girls to practice their literacy.
got it.
So,
Well, I mean, it's a it's a tough one because
mhm,
we're at a different level in terms of knowledge. I mean, there's a thing, just on a side note,
mhm,
with all this and stuff. I mean, because, well, two things. They had the ability. It's just that the infrastructure for them to learn wasn't available due to just the era of the time, and so
mhm.
it wasn't everywhere. But there was
Yeah.
this knowledge that writing is an important thing, and people did write books, and there were I just
Sure.
but side note with that, um, damn it, I forgot.
Sorry. Let me.
No, because I'm the one that went.
Well, I didn't mean to contribute to it.
No,
Uh,
I just
Jim Dockrell says the global standard of living has improved so much since the percentage of literate people went up. It's surprising they didn't continue in that vein and start increasing education. Well, they have. I mean, there are colleges and universities virtually everywhere. I mean, I'm in a little podunk county of 200,000 people, and we've got a college with campuses, well, in 3 cities, and then we've got a major university 3 towns over that's got like 16,000 students. So you get, if you count kindergarten, you get 13 years of basically free education. I say free, but our taxes pay for it. And I mean, just on the just on my father's side of the family, my great grandfather went to the 6th grade, and that's as far as he went. His dad decided that's good enough. You know how to read, how to write, how to do math. Get your butt out here. You're working the ranch. You're old enough now, because that was the priority. They were still subsistence farmers. And if you didn't produce food, you didn't eat. Well, we've moved beyond that. We're no longer agrarian. And my grandfather, who was born in 1920, 22, I want to say, I may have that wrong, was the first person in my paternal line to graduate high school. So education was just not seen as that important for an agrarian family who had to live off of what they produced on that farm. My great grandfather, he did still run a ranch, but he also had a job. He was a logger and he worked at the timber mills. So their livelihood was not focused on that farm. He still raised cattle and they still had chickens and they still had a garden, but that was side money. And so it was more important to my great grandfather that my grandfather graduate high school, whereas his dad didn't see it as important. So people's priorities change, but the emphasis got placed on higher education sometime in the 60s. And I don't
then
know. I
then
think
then they figured out a way to suck the living
y-
financial life.
yes, I think universities and colleges, with a few exceptions, I think colleges and universities became more of a money making business deal than it ever became about higher education. You know,
Oh
there are
no, they
some
had
there are some damn good medical schools.
no, they had the higher education, but they which was there always, but on par with that, they said, "Well, wait, we can make 3 times as much the money,
Yes,
y'all."
yes.
And so that's the problem. The that's the excuse,
Well,
the greed excuse.
I'll use myself as an example. Um, and that's not to say, again, there are some great medical schools, there are some great law schools, there are great technical schools, engineering schools, but we've got a lot of BS as well. I mean, I was in the beginnings of getting an English degree, but then I stopped and I thought about it. Okay, let's say you do this and you spend 4 years and however much money it takes for you to get this degree in English. How is that going to benefit you? What can you do with that degree? And the only thing I can come up with was be an English teacher. And I do not want to be an English teacher. So I decided to cut my losses, take the knowledge that I'd gained from the literature classes that I had taken and the English classes that I'd taken and the math classes that I needed for Common Core. And I just said, okay, that's good enough. I learned quite a bit, but I don't want to be an English teacher. So why would I continue to study it? And I pursued other things.
You know what I've learned with a library card, access to a library. Hell, we could have you in a week, open heart operations.
Yeah, no, that ain't me. That ain't me.
I'm
I
kidding.
am not the guy who could purposely cut into somebody else. I couldn't do that. I'm not that guy.
In a week's time, with a library card and a couple of rounds through the aisles, we could have you igniting the main thruster rockets in a highly precision.
It'd take more than a couple of weeks, but I'd be up for that. You know?
Oh, so we have found a
Yeah,
little
I'm
area
more
of
yeah,
curiosity
I'm
that you
very
enjoy.
mechanical. I am kind of mechanically inclined and I'm very interested in that
You
kind of
didn't back
thing.
out from that one. See, that's
No.
that's a nice thing to say. So yeah, so there. So here's the thing about that, which is interesting, and this could be true for me in other areas and like. But let's stop that, and I'll just focus on you. When I mentioned that variation, had a pleasing, positive
Mhm,
reaction to it in a sort of internal, visceral way, like a natural way. Like you said,
mhm.
well, of course, yeah, I'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing about that. In what
Jim says it best. Doesn't every guy like blowing shit up and making giant fireballs? Yeah. Yeah. I think they do.
that is true.
I mean,
Um,
come on, man.
well, what I was gonna say is that well, that's the specific, but here's the bit. In any given other scenario, due
Mhm,
to any set of circumstances that would have led you down another alternate route and whatnot,
mhm,
this self like little spark of enjoyment
mhm.
or like push towards gravitational push towards um is the stuff that makes rocket scientists or
Yeah.
so, so in other words we have so I have no doubt with you saying it like that, just that simple thing, that
Mhm.
just your sheer eagerness for it is a telltale sign of potential. And some other human might have just I was gonna say with me with the guitar, I picked it
Mhm.
up and said, "Yeah, I'm gonna tackle this puppy."
Mhm.
Where does that come from? Yeah, I'm gonna tackle this
It
puppy.
it it
You know what I'm
it
saying?
it comes from aptitude and enjoyment,
Yeah, an
you know?
honest curiosity for it, whatever that it is.
It I'm remembering back to an interview with Geddy Lee where Dan Rather was asking him about what sparked his interest in music. And he saw a guitar that he had to have. His mom ran a store. After his dad passed away, his mom took over the store. And he had to have this guitar. So his mom advanced him the money and he had to work it off every Saturday at the store. And when he sat down and he first started learning a few little chords, he discovered he was pretty good at it. Yes, his fingers hurt. Yes, it was a lot of work, but he thought he was pretty good at it. And that made him want to go further and push himself further. Just that he wasn't good at sports, so he didn't try to push himself to become good at sports. He tried baseball, he tried football, he tried soccer, he tried hockey. He grew up in Canada. He tried hockey. I just wasn't good at it. But here was something that I was good at and was actually fun. So heck yeah, I'm going to pursue this. And I find that that is true with most folks. That if you are, look at yourself with the guitar, if you weren't good at it, you probably wouldn't enjoy it as much as you do. You might still enjoy it. But if you weren't good at it, you wouldn't enjoy it as much, I don't think.
But it's the enjoyment of it. I'll give it to you like this. Well,
Well, it is a circle. It is a circle.
that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a circle. But I'll,
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you these two. One, if you remember Groundhog's Day,
Yeah.
when Bill Murray starts off and he starts realizing that he's stuck in it,
Mm-hmm.
at first he's bitching up a storm, angry,
Mm-hmm.
and he goes through those emotional back and forths. At one point, he realizes, well, if I'm here forever, I'm going to take a piano class.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a saxophone class. I'm going to become a paramedic. And so he lived a whole many lifetimes
Mm-hmm.
in the same day to where at one scene he's like playing a piano. He resuscitates just a million and one things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has it all timed. He's walking down the street, then all of a sudden he starts running as a kid falls out of a tree. And he catches the kid and he goes, "You have never thanked me for that," you know.
Well, the thing about it is that if we had enough time, eventually we'd get around to it. But we have a specific set of days and months and years,
Yeah,
and so
true.
we go in the direction. So it's not like we can cover all aspects and whatnot. The other one was about your cyclical and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've run into like I used to be big into comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I still like the idea of it, but it's not the same.
Right.
It's kind of like playing with toys, and then you find out about girls.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, toys. You can
Yeah.
look at your toy, and you're like, I don't know, but
Yeah.
he sure looks good. Um, I remember when that happened to me. I
Yeah.
busted out all my toys. I'm gonna play, but I had this girl in my mind, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, damn, but she's so much 10 times better than all this crap.
Yeah.
And once that idea popped into my head, toys were done, dude.
Yeah.
I mean,
G.I. Joe goes in a box and that box goes in the closet. Yeah.
I looked at the GI Joes and said, "Man, I really enjoyed you guys so much." Like in my mind, man, you guys are awesome, but I can't, I can't even bother with you anymore. I just can't
Yeah.
do it
You
because
guys are great, but look at her. You know, do you blame me? Sorry, you got to go in the closet.
they
Yeah.
were so much better than toys by leaps and so much better. In any event,
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, I like comic books. I've stumbled on channels which I'll watch for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Grown ass men doing conversations on comic books
Mm-hmm.
as if they were 14 years old.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there, gray beard and whatnot, and they're talking about the adventures that this. And it's kind of cathartic to me And I've tried. I did a video showing but at the same time, like, damn, could I really be at this point in time that into comic books?
Yeah.
I don't think so. But to each their own.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have found other interests and more mature things. But then again, I firmly believe it to be true. It's just an opinion, but I think that it's true that little girls grow up to be women and little boys grow up to be older little boys. Our toys just get more expensive. We went from skateboards to bicycles to cars. And from there, it was the quality of the car. Then some of us got into boats, and then some of us got into airplanes and things like that. Our toys became more and more expensive. But it's still that, and you use the right word, it's still that cathartic thing. You've got to have a way, you've got to have something that is yours to entertain yourself, to entertain your mind. If it's playing music, or if it's working on a woodworking project or a metal project or whatever it is, you've got to have that thing that's yours, that you can do, that you're good at, that you'd like to keep pursuing.
Yeah.
I mean, we all need it. Women do all kinds of different hobbies. Men have all different kinds of hobbies. Some of them cross paths, some of them will never cross paths. Some of them interlace with one another, and some of them are just complete polar opposites. But it's okay. It's all right to have that diversion. It's good for you.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I always liked the blues idea
Mm-hmm.
because old guys were still cool playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought when I was young, man, I could play this till I'm old.
Mm-hmm.
It still looks cool. But now, if I were dressed like Mick Jagger, I don't think so. So I used to think in those terms, in passing. But I used to think blues is forever. And then,
In many ways, it is.
40 years after the fact, Mick Jagger at 80 years old is still doing his thing.
He still do up there walking like he was brought up in a house full of real skinny doors.
They were old back then.
Yeah, I know.
They
That's
were
what I
old.
mean. They've been dead for 30 years. Their bodies just refuse to lay down.
Back then, we thought of them as old.
I know. I know. I remember seeing them on TV for the first time, their American debut. They
Isn't that
were old to
weird?
me then.
They were old back then,
I
dude.
know.
It's so weird.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's this thing called the Flynn effect,
Uh,
and what it is there's a scientist called something Flynn, and Dr. Flynn discovered that IQs across the eras, people's IQs kept increasing, and they had to keep correcting
mm-hmm.
to put the middle lane of IQ at 100, the
Mm-hmm.
average.
Yeah.
But he said if you were to take the average of today and measure people back when,
Oh, yeah.
they would have been practically on the verge of handicap,
Yeah.
mentally speaking.
Yes.
And we know that's not true because these people were people that built great monuments and great
Mm-hmm.
all that. So
Well,
what's
the
going on?
railroad system. I mean, all this stuff.
Philosophy books, just all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Science books, also. I mean, they may have gotten things wrong, but the fact that they were doing work. So what? So he basically said that people are getting smarter.
Mm-hmm.
Flat out, people are getting smarter, and he explains various reasons why. One of them being, as technology is, commonplace all around us, we all use it intrinsically. It's just a par for the course, and so people automatically upgrade their intelligence because it's just what they use. There's even a comedy thing where they have a video skit where a baby 20 years from now is born, and the baby pushes out, grabs on to the scissors that the nurse was holding, and yanks the umbilical cord away from her, and he snips it himself. He gets up, the little baby
Yeah.
walks over to the tablet and starts, and he takes a selfie and he
Mhm.
posts it on Facebook. It's a hilarious little sort of
Well,
jokey.
I mean, uh, yeah, I mean,
It's hilarious.
you got 3-year-olds using iPads.
Well,
I mean, pretty basic, but still they're using iPads.
so on the opposite side of that
Mhm.
Flynn effect thing, the one that I dislike, the Charles Murray slash this guy, bell curve thing. They say there's no hope for these people. They're pretty much stuck, but based under the category of categories that they categorize under. Um, and
Yeah.
and people throw down the gavel
Mhm.
that like the outcomes of it because it benefits them.
Well, yeah, it's confirmation bias. But I think
Yeah,
history has proven that that was a bunch of BS.
even though that is a bunch of BS,
Mhm.
and there's reasons why
Mhm.
people believe it.
Well, sure, because it follows or confirms their preconceived notions. They have a bias in one direction, and here's something written down that confirms it.
The fact that people believe it and that it's bias driven,
Mhm.
and it's also a cyclical cycle in itself. Like,
Mhm.
let's not let more information in because that won't be good,
Yeah.
um, subconsciously or otherwise.
Mhm.
Um, these people that like the outcome never question, man, I like the outcome, and it just so happens, astoundingly, I fall within the group that doesn't suffer the flings and
Well,
arrows of that. Like, everything aligns. It's always from one's own
mhm.
vantage point that
Yeah.
the beneficial aspects are always attributed.
But that's why we have to be hard on our own opinions.
Yeah.
I firmly believe because you can believe yourself to be right on any topic. Pick a topic, it doesn't matter what. And if you are of the opinion that I know what I'm talking about, my mind is made up, I don't need any more information on it. That right there, in and of itself, shows me that you're wrong because new
Well,
information is being discovered on every topic, every second of every day.
there's a problem too in that you're saying that. Yeah, that's true in a general, but just a side, like, curveball in that there are situations that, in spite of the person's ignorance or lack of wanting to
Mhm.
do that you said, it just so happens that the universe comes to an agreement where whatever their
Well,
ignorant stance is, it actually correlates, or I'm sorry, it actually is the fact of the matter in some
well,
cases. No, no, let me just say this. It is the fact of the case. It's just that
yeah, but that's
they,
accidental.
well, exactly. Well,
Even a broken clock is right twice a day. All right.
right. But enough of those accidentals, because
Mm,
there's a lot of situations like that.
sure.
People start to believe that, man, I am
Yeah.
on it.
And and
But, you know,
and that's what I mean. You have to examine your own opinions because you can't use the outliers to represent the norm. You know, it's just like you ask um, 10 teenage girls, and ninth grade. So fairly young teenage girls. What would you rate yourself from 1 to 10? The majority of them are going to say, "Well, I rate myself a 10." Okay, when you're that young, yeah, you've got enough ego, not realizing that that's perfect. So they won't extrapolate from that a little further. If everybody's a 10, doesn't that mean 10 is average now?
yeah. Well, yeah, it's so true.
So,
It's so true.
you got to examine your own opinions and make sure, wait a minute, a 10, that's perfection. That means there's no room for improvement. I'm as perfect
Let me
as
let me
anybody can get. when we all know that that's not the case.
Let me throw this one out with that sort of concept in mind.
Hmm.
So with the bell curve, the idea is, and I'm speaking broadly, and I guess for the future, um, I could be updated according to what I learn in the future. But as it stands right now, what I understand, um, the bell curve ends up saying that African
Hmm.
African Americans um, fall in this lower trajectory of the IQ spectrum,
Hmm.
and then white people
Hmm.
fall in this further up, more impressive
Yeah.
thing. And so you have these people talking about that if the average is this and that you were saying. This is
Hmm.
a different thing, but it's within that sort of concept of like looking at. Um, so the bell curve, there's two bell curves. One goes further back than the other, but they're
Hmm.
both bell curves. Let's say at the peak is the average, and at the extremes are either incredibly what do you call it, gifted,
Hmm.
and incredibly not gifted. So they say, and all white people score this. Who are those all white people? They include all people, French from European, French people,
Hmm.
uh, you know,
Germans.
German
Yeah.
people. It's just
Nordics. Yeah.
all
Hmm.
people from the east, people from the south. It includes anybody of European descent within the
Hmm.
category of white,
Hmm.
which is a broad category.
Sure.
Um, so on average, they would hit the 100%, which is the average thing, and then on the extremes, they go gifted and this and that. That's what they're testing. Um, so there's more better results within this category of white, but the category of white includes so many people to this one group, and you may think, well, all those people belong in that one group, and therefore, of course, and that's what they argue instead, or they don't argue that, but you see them. No, they just tag it all as white people.
Hmm.
But if you ask these people individually, their white people inclusion starts to become smaller and smaller. And a lot
Hmm.
of those people that the bell curve includes as white people start to disappear into Never Never Land because of um, cultural, personal, um, what do you call it? Uh, preferable,
Spirituality. Oh, okay.
preferable assumptions.
Hmm.
So, anyways, long story short, if you read the bell curve, and by the way, it's wrong as hell,
Hmm.
because in many it's wrong because they're using that category to categorize all these people into one clump. And I guess you could do that, but here's the thing: it shows that that bad or less than a preferable result for a certain group. But on the inverse, that they never talk about, it also means, and you could look at it, it also means that there's more dumb or less than brilliant people from the other group
Hmm.
walking around. So you'd more likely stumble upon a less than magnificent specimen, intellectually speaking, of the privileged group or the better group. Better not. What's the word? The European group, let's say broadly,
Hmm.
than you would of the other group. But these people flip that script because that's not convenient, and they just focus. Well, there's more people that are below average on the one. So what they're doing is that they're these are just averages that they're showing, but it's just as condemning to the one group as it is to the other.
Hmm.
If you flip the script and say, well, that there's more of this group, so that means that there's more people below the average scale.
Right.
Therefore, on a day-to-day basis, you would trip over someone of European descent with less than spectacular
That's the funny thing about averages. Half of the people are going to be better, half of the people are going to be worse.
right. So, but these people that grab onto this concept do so for their biased whatnot.
Sure.
Um, when what they should be doing. and they never look at the flip side of it because it wouldn't fit their
Their
comfort.
narrative, exactly.
What they should be doing, they say, okay, well, that's what the book says, but we focus on people as individuals.
Hmm. Yeah, and well, you also have to take into consideration that that was a snapshot in time. Because when was that book published? That research was
94,
that research was done over the course
94.
of more than a couple of weeks. You know.
Oh, no, no, they took, and another thing that this guy did, or these two guys did, they took information from around the world and whatnot
Mhm.
that had been already out there. These people are data gatherers. So this Murray guy and these are sociology type guys.
Mhm.
They compiled it, and in their thing they say, and I'm paraphrasing terribly, but it's there. It can be found anywhere on the
Yeah.
internet. It says, as far as notions of race and such, I'm paraphrasing badly. Um, in order to get the results and whatnot, we are just going by the self-reporting of people.
Yeah. Self-reporting, which is one of the most unreliable that there is.
Not only that, this self-reporting, depending on country to country, can be a situation like in the United States where you have a select few categories,
Hmm.
and then you have the written down responses, but you have these select categories, and people, more or less will fit into that, and then they could nuance it on the bottom, but they have their set, categories. So um, the group that's white is everyone in the kitchen sink.
Hmm.
So, like, a Hispanic,
Yeah.
if a
Yeah.
Hispanic is Hispanic and of European ancestry, they check the one racial category
Mhm.
plus an ethnic category. It's the only ethnic category that you check off that people divide for. So, for instance, there are no such thing. This is a weird thing. There, in theory, on paper at least, there's no such thing as a white person in the United States. And
I
I'll
agree. I agree.
well, no, I'm saying it, in this way. On paper for the census,
Hmm.
you're either, for the category of European descent, you're
Hmm.
either non-Hispanic white.
Hmm. Caucasian, non-Hispanic, or Caucasian Hispanic.
No, it says non-Hispanic.
Hmm.
The wording is non-Hispanic white only, or Hispanic white. Those are the two white
Okay,
categories are
well, that
European.
must be a Florida thing because in Oregon it's Caucasian, non-Hispanic, or Hispanic. Those are
No,
your
they
choices.
they write, well, let's not split hairs. What we'll say in that case is that it's not just a Florida thing. It's a, you could look at the census, but
Okay.
let's say it's a state thing. Um, Caucasian and white are, what's the word when two things are the same thing?
Synonyms. They're, yeah.
Yeah, it's same difference.
Yeah.
It's saying the same things. The point of this is,
Understood. Yeah.
yeah, the point of this is that there's two categories.
Mm-hmm.
There's, for Europeans,
Mm-hmm.
European non-Hispanic,
Mm-hmm.
which is categorized in one thing, but they add the non-Hispanic to the sentence of the European.
Mm-hmm.
So you're European, not non-Hispanic. So you're
Mm-hmm.
either a European non-Hispanic or you're European Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
So
Basically.
there's those two. But the point is that all these people fall into a category of European, and then they're judged IQ wise within that category, and the other people are a smaller pool of people. So you have more to draw from this big pool, and then
Well,
they judge the one group of people from the other group of people to arrive at this IQ level, or average. And I don't know. It's, look.
but then again, they're relying on self-reporting. Do you do you know what your IQ is right off the top of your head?
I have no
I
clue.
don't. I have no clue what mine is. So you've got a certain select few people, just individuals. Forget about races. You have just a few individuals collectively who know what their IQ is. Because if they're relying on self-reporting, that indicates that they would have to know what their IQ is in order to even take part in this so-called study.
No, well, they extract, so the information's out there, but basically
Mm-hmm.
any tests across the 20th century and the self-reporting of race and whatnot, like that whole idea,
Mm-hmm.
they compiled that and they did the math on that in order to demonstrate that
Well,
basically this Murray guy, they're tr- there's something going on there that's kind
oh
of
yeah,
weird.
that's definite. Just the fact that you would want to even start collecting that information to me is a little off.
I
But
mean,
if you're a sociologist and you're trying to figure something out with a point in mind, you want to try to help a certain problem or you want to try to fix a problem or something like that, then I can see maybe we need to study this. Maybe we don't have the numbers. But you can publish anything you want. But when you publish that thing, you better be ready for the pushback that comes because of it.
well, the book, the bell curve book, had that section of compilation of data,
Mm-hmm.
but throughout it has what they extrapolate from the data
Mm-hmm.
according to, okay, so this is what we got and this is what we think about what we got. The what we think, well, number one, if I'm not saying that their data, that what they collected was um, malicious in itself isolated, but the part of them calculating out in terms of, now let's extrapolate what we think about what we found here and
Well,
what it actually, that part
the whole thing is BS to me.
is suspect, and it's slightly distasteful in
Yeah.
the,
Why would you
what,
even go there?
yeah, no, no,
Unless that's what you were attempting to prove from the get go.
well, no, not necessarily. You could have that kind of a data, and I guess you do have to. The problem is the assumption they, yeah, there's something fishy with that, and to get into that, it's a whole mess of
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
But it
Right.
doesn't seem right, and just because it doesn't seem right doesn't mean either here nor there. But it doesn't seem. It seems like the agenda is something else, and I don't know.
Yeah. And
But that's my assumption. That's my gut feeling, but that doesn't mean that's true or
yeah.
not. But I just don't like it doesn't seem kosher to me in terms of rigidly intellectual.
No, I don't think it is personally. I think it's pseudo intellectual in an attempt to confirm a preconceived notion that they already had
Yeah, it's very. But
to
and
justify their own biases.
okay, it feels like that,
Hmm.
but
And
from a very So these people aren't stupid people. The ones that create these things.
stupid people, I mean, smart people do stupid things all the time.
Well, that's the thing. And then the stupid people that are the followers because they like the outcome due to
Sure.
cultural things, those people are like a drum echoing again and again. Um, the reason I don't like it is, well, number one, you have to treat people individually. Number two, I think it's swayed. And I think that their assumptions are swayed due to what I mentioned before. You could take
Oh, I
your,
think the research is flawed in a number of ways, and I'm not a scholar by any stretch of the imagination. But I think
yeah,
the research is flawed in many, many ways. And I think that they were just fishing for a way to justify their own thoughts,
yeah,
their
that
own
kind of feels,
biases.
I think
I
that
mean,
that kind of is what it is, you know.
so,
I think that's kind of what, and
you know,
going,
if you have a theory about a group of people and you can find some level of research that supports that theory, you have been vindicated. See, I was right. Doesn't
and it's just,
matter,
and it's
how.
as easy as that.
Yeah, it is. It's as easy as that. And
It's it. Okay, so
the believers in this kind of BS, that's what they're getting because that's their attitude.
it's. I'll use this in a non incendiary way. If we were to take like Cubans, right,
Mhm.
and group them into the Cubans. Okay, here it is. It's the unpalatable side of this is the racial assumption aspect. So if you were to take a group of Cubans to be less volatile, because I
Mhm.
mean it doesn't really matter to to people out because it's such a hodgepodge. If you take Cubans like all Cubans and like do like test scores and this and that,
Mhm.
um, and you extrapolate, well, their results were X, Y, and Z, and so this is what Cubans result. People out there might be, even though Cubans are comprised of many um, ethnic groups, many
Mhm.
people from all different places, with a source, but that main source, there's also pockets of all sorts of weird things. Can you really ascribe a racial quality to these people under the banner of I mean, Cuba is a state or country, and it is a place where people made babies with each other across time. But
Sure.
not everybody that made babies with each other with people from the same places or
Right.
backgrounds. So
Right.
what you
It's a
have is
melting pot. Yeah.
it's a melting pot with a Spanish source
Sure.
and then other people coming in. Whereas like the U.S. is a different story with a more British or I guess Germanic
All
or,
over the yeah.
but it's still a hodgepodge of things. Can you really?
Well, if you were to give the exact same IQ test to people in Cuba, and I don't know about their school system, I really have no idea. And well, let's just pick Miami. You pick 100 people, just randomly pick 100 people in Miami and randomly pick 100 people in Cuba, and you give them the same test, you're going to have some variations in scores because it's based on what you've been taught or what you know from the outside world and the outside influences.
That's another good point. That's another
So,
problem with IQ tests because
so yeah, exactly.
if you have if you if okay, so I'll say it like this, and there, you know what? Actually, Veritasium
Mhm.
or that one guy that's like he does really cool videos. He did an IQ test
Mhm.
a few years back. But in his video, he explains the history of how things go. He's like a very science guy type guy.
Oh, Simon Whistler from
He's like
Veritasium.
Veritasium. Yeah, he's got like slightly a roundish face. He's like a young
Yeah,
guy,
wears glasses.
yeah, like a nice
Yeah,
disposition type
yeah.
guy.
Simon Whistler.
He went into detail and he took a DNA test. DNA test. He took a IQ test
Hmm.
at the end of it and stuff. It's a really cool video because like he goes through all the ups and downs and I think he nails it in terms of all the variables that
Hmm.
are question marks and whatnot. And he mentions all the things, a lot of the things like the Flynn effect and
Hmm.
a lot of the objections that you had. So it's nice. It's a nice thing in this and that. He tested with that and he brought up all these different variations and stuff. And there's no accounting for things like what you said just now. If you take a person that's never studied in an American culture and ask them to perform um, a test based on American culture,
Hmm.
they might get something right that they saw in a movie once.
Yeah.
But other than that, now some things like little dots and patterns, even that's suspect because if you take a guy from the jungles of frickin' Zimbabwe
Hmm.
that's accustomed to pastoralist living
Hmm.
and that their focus is honing certain skills and you put them in front of a thing to talk about what the Kardashians, I mean, I know that's not what's, but I'm being
Sure.
exaggerated, some mathematical thing,
Hmm.
you have to even know what a frickin' Greek letter is in terms of
Yeah.
like some sort of equation
Yeah.
to even bother with. Now, if you were to have taught them the Greek letters and this and that, that's a different story
Yeah.
before taking a test. So there's all these variables. So I think there's a little bit of bull crappery
Hmm.
going on.
Yeah.
A little
And
bit.
and your intelligence is directly proportional to who you are and where you are at the time. Because as smart as you and I are, if we were put into a cornfield in Iowa and told to harvest, we wouldn't have the first clue on where to start.
Well, intelligence isn't okay. So another thing also is that intelligence, they don't know how to quantify that. So that's an aspect of intelligence, but there's so many aspects of intelligence.
Exactly my point. That's what I was
Yeah,
getting at, because
yeah,
that's what I mean. Who you are and where you are at the time. Because while somebody who is third generation growing corn in Iowa may know just instinctively what to do, you and I would be lost. We'd be out there going, "Damn, this stuff's tall. Y'all do this all year long," you know?
yeah. There's also the conditions that one is, if
Mhm.
you're, but and it depends on what you're focused on as far as intelligence is concerned.
Right.
But if you're raised in a situation that you don't have leisure time to focus on, I don't know, 17th century philosophy,
Mhm.
you're not going to be um, versed in that freaking topic.
Yeah.
You're just not, because it's just not.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of that too.
As Jim Dockrell says, intelligence is different from knowledge, and he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. You may be knowledgeable on 1,000 things because you deal with them or you're interested in them. You're knowledgeable about music and the biographies of bands because you studied that. I didn't. That doesn't mean you're more intelligent than I am or I'm more intelligent than you are. Just that I'm ignorant on the subject that you studied. That's all that means.
Yeah, one way to look at it is just like that.
Mhm.
Um,
I don't know. I still think people are people, and that they're capable of doing a lot more than folks give them credit for,
but
and capable of a lot more than we give ourselves credit for too many times. But
I agree with that. Um, we under very much, it is possible that we underestimate and people underestimate their own abilities and other people's abilities from one's vantage point. And it could be self-inflicted as well.
yeah.
But so I agree with that. So there's people that, like, let's say there's some sort of gas station attendant. They
Mhm.
could be a mathematical whiz, but they're
Yeah.
working a gas station. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. I
Exactly.
understand that. But here's my question to you. And there's, well, I'll just ask the question. Um, so I agree with that you said, but now, you do you believe that there's people, like, let's say 1,000 people, there's people that just can't quite get it, in terms of
Sure.
putting two and two together.
Sure.
No matter how hard you try,
Sure.
they don't have um, the certain, whatever you want to call it,
Yes.
right. So there
Yes.
are variations in the grant. There's all the things we talked about, but how can you quantify, all these things?
It's
And even if,
difficult.
right, and even if someone, like, let's say you're out and about and someone doesn't get your drift about something or other that you're talking about
Mhm.
in some sort of everyday, that doesn't give us the right to belittle, humiliate, or take advantage
Absolutely
of.
not. Absolutely not. And this is
Right.
why I'm saying be hard on your one of the reasons why I say be hard on your own opinions, because maybe it's not that person's capacity to understand. Maybe it's your capacity to relay that information. And I say that as a guy who does tutorial videos. All right. It's not on the person who's listening to me to present the information. It's on me to put it into language that a person who's never done this before can understand. If I'm not accomplishing that, they're not going to get it. But if they are getting it, then I think that I've accomplished that.
Yeah.
So the onus is not on the listener, the onus is on the presenter, because maybe the person is more than capable of understanding the concept that you're trying to get across to them. Maybe you're just not presenting it in a way that they can understand.
Do you remember, just to tag on to that, kindergarten?
Vaguely.
Well, I mean, but you remember,
Dude, it
like,
was over 50 years ago.
do you remember once the egg and sperm were united? That moment, Mark. No. Do you remember? Do you remember in kindergarten?
Mm,
At least tell me, more or less.
mm,
But you have seen it, after the fact, where the teacher, what she would do is she would give us a well, it was kind of, if looking back, it was kind of, because I can remember moments. It was just 40 something years ago for me.
mhm,
Um, she would give a sheet to all the kids,
mhm,
and there would be huge, like, paper, the line paper, but
mhm.
the lines were like bigger. And in the lines, there was a little thing on top, and there was a big G and a little G, a big F and a little F.
We didn't
This-
get into that until first grade.
I was doing that in kindergarten.
Well, see,
You were a late bloomer, man. No,
and kindergarten was overglorified daycare when I went. You went half a day.
dude, we were doing astrophysics. No, just kidding. But the teacher, no, it was full of cartoons and stuff. But
Yeah.
they would give you a sheet, and the teacher, I mean, maybe I don't know that it was and then you would just trace the G
Hmm.
various times,
Yeah.
and they would give you another one. Now, here's the bit. Thinking back, I can't remember what I was thinking about. I was just running through copying what she was doing. But the act of copying the letters
Hmm.
at that moment, in my mind, could not have connected to me reading a book about the Doors in 1992
No.
while
Yeah.
sitting over my thing and reading about psychedelic experiences and California in the 1960s. But it was a first step in
Yes.
something that I wasn't aware of that would connect to all other things.
Right.
And so, if you rob people of that, or any of the passage moments of that development across time, you can screw them up.
I remember. Do you remember making that connection? That you're writing letters, and you're right, because it was, you traced it, and then the next line you traced it again, and then you had to do it without tracing it on the next line down. And do you remember making the connection between these are letters and these are words? And I may not know what that word means, but I now understand that this word is made of letters.
I'd have to think on that, but I can't off the cuff think of that.
Mine was in a, I made that connection. God, I don't know how old I was, 5 or 6. It was a little paperback book full of Charlie Brown comics. And I remember the um, the comic. It was Snoopy dancing by. Charlie Brown said, "Look at that, a happy dog." The next panel was, "I'd love to be like him." Lucy in the third panel says, "Not me." Then in the fourth panel, she says, "It's hard to feel sorry for yourself when you're happy." I didn't know what it meant, but I made the connection that those letters made words. Now I need to find out what these words are and what they mean. So it was probably kindergarten, first grade, somewhere in there. Maybe it was kindergarten. But I remember making that connection. I get it now. These letters make words. Now I got to figure out what those were.
It was the next progression.
Mm-hmm. And where it used to be just a bunch of jumbled up lines, and Dad, read this to me. I don't know what this is. Then it's almost like they went into focus. And it's weird that I can remember that comic, but I remember thinking, aha, these letters make words. Now I got to find out what these words are.
And there's also a concept of you not objecting early on
Mhm.
to what the teacher is telling you to do. You're going through the motions, and that act is allowing you to accept phonetically and in writing that ph and f are different but
Yeah.
sound the same.
Hmm.
um, you're accepting these things without question.
Hmm.
But there comes a time, or there may never come a time, that where most people don't question these things, but some do, whatever the number is. And it could be things based on history, religion, geography, whatever the case. And that's when you start running into trouble, because at that stage of learning,
Yeah.
when you start let's call it rebelling against narratives, depending on who you are, you are now introducing the idea of a challenge to the teacher. And the teacher that's teaching said idea, if done right, if she has the time, he or she has the time, or is willing to delve down that road, it's an important, crucial thing, because it is important that there's objections, even if they're stupid, in that format early on. Because what happens is that you're addressing um, variations in the students' thinking, and shutting doors that may need to be shut, and opening others that may.
Well.
If it's kind of, what's the word, Mark, where dogmatic.
Hmm.
Um, if you're gonna teach dogma and exclude all variation, and I know you have to teach kids a certain thing and they have to stick with it, but I did a lot of challenging, um,
I
even when
did.
I was wrong.
I didn't do that until about eighth grade. That was when I started getting into the rebellious and wait a minute, so these things don't make sense. In elementary school, I don't know, it was 100% selfish, but I actually liked going to school in elementary school because that's where all my friends were. So I wasn't there to learn. Learning was something that happened in between recesses. My friends were at school. They lived across town and I couldn't just take off and go, because where we lived way out in the boonies one way and my friends all lived on the other side of town. And that was, 15, 16 miles. And when you're 7, mom ain't letting you ride your bike over there. Forget it. So I enjoyed school and I knew I was there to learn, and I kept a pretty good grade average. I did all right, but I really started to question and rebel when I hit about 8th grade because some things just didn't make sense. Unbeknownst to me, that's because they were starting to teach more advanced things. And I don't know that maybe I was ready for those advanced things. It was concepts that I still rebel against algebra. I know it has a purpose and I know there's a good purpose for it, but not from me. I'm never going to use this crap. Well, yes, you are. Now you've got to draw arcs. So you need to know where these 2 points are and where that point is. So I never should have written in that book, math sucks. I use fractions and decimals all the time. Not the normal decimals like a penny, a nickel, a dime, and a quarter. Now I'm looking at quick, what's the decimal equivalent to 13/16? Buggered if I know. I have to think about it. But it was my stubbornness and beginning to believe that I'd already been taught everything I needed to know. And all this other stuff was just a bunch of crap to try to keep me in this chair for 8 hours when I could be doing something else. And that's when I started hating school and started rebelling against it.
Yeah, it's if you rebel against programming, even if it's to your benefit, that says a lot about now. But
Um,
all kids rebel too, so it's a problem, because you need to, if especially in the society we live in, I mean, I don't know. It's a difficult thing because this whole idea of autonomy that I always harp on,
Hmm.
I haven't revisited it much in terms of kids, but I think it lays somewhere where as long as you're the responsibility of your parents, they have to be the ones that sort of steer you.
Well,
And school is there as well, but the ultimate thing lays on the parents. But as
I,
far as your personality of rebelling against ideas or challenging teachers, I think there's a healthy aspect to it, and I think then there's a
yeah,
selfish, petulant aspect to it too.
yeah, yeah, all of the above, and I agree with that. But I don't know. Yes, you are more shaped and molded by your parents, but the average parent isn't equipped, and I don't mean mentally, but just they have so many things to focus on. I don't think they're equipped to be the primary teacher. So we have, as a society, decided to delegate that to a group we call teachers. Some are good, some are bad. Excuse me. We have to be able to, we have to trust that they are good. And we know how far that goes sometimes. But about all we can do is backstop. About all we can do is guide. You know, I think independence does need to be taught. Freedom needs to be taught, and self reliance needs to be taught. At the end of the day, you have to rely on yourself because when you're alone, you got nobody to help. And these people who are not taught independence and self reliance were the people we saw, for instance, during Hurricane Katrina up on the roof with a big sign screaming, "Help me." Well,
I mean, that is an extreme situation.
that is an extreme situation, but it's not like they didn't know it was coming, is my point. You have to be self reliant and make that judgment call. Yeah, we got to get out of here. The fire's coming. We got to get out of here. We can't wait. Well, but this show's on TV. Yeah, well, screw that show. We got to get out of here. You know, you got a flat tire. You got to pull over and change it. You can't just continue to drive on a flat tire. You're going to damage your car.
Sparks.
Yeah. So you have to be a little bit more
A tra-
self-reliant and be able to take care of yourself. And if
a
you
tra-
can't take care of yourself, you're in trouble.
I like the flat tire one,
Yeah.
like a carving
Yeah.
in the pavement for like
Yeah.
miles.
Yeah. Throwing sparks behind you. Linda says, I was in second grade when reading suddenly made sense. Bottom of the class when I started, top of the class by the end of the year. Yeah, I was the same way. Once the words started making sense, I wanted to learn more. And I read more. I was never one of those. That's why math, I didn't really like math at all, simply because it made sense to me. 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay, great, fine, terrific. And I figured once I learned how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, that was all I needed. But reading, even a history textbook, that's interesting to me. That is genuine knowledge coming in between these ears here. Reading history, reading English. I know how to use the Oxford comma. I know how to use the apostrophe because I'm interested in that. It made sense to me, and I'm like, yeah,
I
okay, cool.
felt I felt a sense of we're being locked in. We're being indoctrinated. Yes, I understood they were teaching things, but the whole idea of being fenced into a it almost, even when I was a kid,
Mhm.
although I did like private school um, for the most part.
Mm. That's another thing. You had that other layer because you went to Catholic school, right?
Yeah, I went to two of them.
So you had another layer there as well because
Well, I went to kindergarten was Baptist because that's just what was there. So my
Mhm,
parents put me there.
mhm,
And then the two other schools that I went, grade schools that I went to, were Catholic.
mhm.
And I liked it.
Yeah.
Public school, number one in the Christian schools.
Mhm.
I don't care. It is what it is. People are just better, dude. They were
Oh
more
yeah.
decent. They were more decent. They were more respectable. Believe it or not, more respectable of personal spaces.
You
When
had uniforms, right?
I had uniforms.
Yeah.
When you get dropped in public school, people are fighting.
Anything goes. Yeah.
It's disgusting. So to
Mhm.
me, I'm a proponent of private schools, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. I mean, the first time. So when I went to the first class, and I remember her, Mrs. Barfield. She said she wrote down a long mathematical thing,
Mhm.
and all the kids were there. And I sat in the front. This was the first public school, and I went through. And after that, I went to the back. But sat in the front, and the class was like 30 kids, dude. I was like,
Mhm.
this never happened in well, anyways. So that the amount of kids in one class with one teacher, just the whole environment was crap.
Mhm.
She said, can anybody please raise their hand if they can read this?" And I felt an uncomfortable silence. Nobody was saying, and I raised my hand.
Mhm.
And she says, "Yes. What's your name, Eloy? Go ahead, Eloy." That's it. 100 million 54, and I went down the thing. It was like 10 million something for a little kid, you
Mhm.
know, that isn't necessarily in private school. It was, but
Mhm.
not in public school. It was this long number, and I read it out loud, and the kids behind me went, "Wow!" And I felt embarrassment
Why?
because I was a little kid, and there was too much attention to, like,
There
in
was no
private.
pride. There was no pride. It was embarrassment.
I felt embarrassed. I
Wow.
felt zero pride. I was
Wow.
answering her question because nobody else was answering it. As
Mhm.
a little kid, remembering that moment, I felt no pride at all. I felt embarrassment because they were responding to something. I didn't see it positive, nothing. Um, in private school,
Mhm.
nobody would have said crap. They would
Yeah.
have all gave that answer
Yeah.
roughly because that's the level we were at in private school.
Yeah.
So I got dropped into. I'm not gonna say it,
Mhm.
and it was all short. After that,
Mhm.
I started sitting in the back of class because I didn't want to be noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was always that kid too. I sat in the back of the class.
I didn't want to be
Man,
noticed.
we've been on for almost 2.5 hours. We need to really seriously think about landing the plane here. But Jim Dockrell says, I remember and everyone in class taking turns to read aloud. Yeah, we did that. Oh man, second and third grade. No, maybe third grade we started doing that. Third and fourth grade. Yeah, we read aloud quite often. And that was more of a confirmation thing that yes, I got it. Yes, I know
I
how to
was,
do this.
I was, I was, I
But
have been a strange variation in a weird way. I just don't like conforming.
well, I yeah.
In conforming in the ways that would be appropriate to conform.
It
Screw
depends on what it is. It depends on what it is. The classrooms are all basically pretty much identical desks in rows. And you got to come in, sit down, and, conform that way. There were certain clothes we weren't allowed to wear. You had to conform in that way. We thought it was stupid, but there was a reason for it. And as an adult, I can now see, okay, there was a reason for it. And, you can't have a bunch of kids running around in short shorts and flip flops. Okay, I get it. But at the time, I don't know. Maybe I've always been a go along to get along kind of a guy. But I figure if the rules weren't outrageous, what I considered to be outrageous, Yeah, all right. I'll work within your rules and learn your system, see how your system works. But the minute that bell rings and I'm off campus, all of that stays at school. Because what I'm gonna go get on my skateboard and jump the biggest ramp I can build. You know,
I wanted to stay in private school. I wanted to because, well,
and
I didn't
and
know I didn't know the difference before it, but after the fact, I was like, wow.
and that's interesting to me because you said you don't like conformity, but it seems to me that private school has that much more restriction and forces you to conform that much more.
Yeah, but um, I don't know how to answer that because maybe it's not the conformity that was the problem. Maybe it was, you know what? In it's it's the caring in private school. Even if they didn't care, to the degree that they did care was sufficient, so that the student body felt supported. In public school, it's almost like going to a maximum security prison and dropping the soap.
So, do you think that the teachers at the private school challenged you more intellectually? Was it a little bit more tough on you mentally? More, they
I
were
think
more advanced, obviously. But
I think the fact that parents pay the school, you would think that that gives you an easy access to good grades, but that's not the case because everybody's paying that's going there. But I think that they're more careful with their students in a holistic way,
yeah,
and I think that it breeds the environment to allow students to flourish. And then the other place, there were teachers that were like that in the public school, but there was this sort of, looking back on it, um, kind of like Pink Floyd, um,
another
the
brick on the wall. Yeah.
yeah, that sort of machine churning you
Mass
in.
production. Yeah, I
Yeah,
I got, and that's where my rebellion started in like the 8th grade because it seemed it seemed to me that that's what it was. It was mass production. You're going to be in this class for the next 35 minutes and then I'm done with you lot. The next one comes in. So it seemed to me that was my perception that the teacher was marking time and just going, okay, first cycle through, done. Second cycle through, done. Third cycle through, done. Lunchtime. Then we got 2 more classes after lunch. Then I can go home for the day and take these damn shoes off. It seemed to me that that's what it was. It was a
yeah.
massive game of pass the buck.
That was that you're saying feels like a part of it. Let me answer Jim's last thing because this is a good one.
Okay.
So Jim says, I'm assuming it's to do with that they, since parents pay the schools and the children are there, there's more care for the thing. I'm assuming that's it, but he could correct me if that's not. So he says that may be a good argument for increased public school funding, smaller classes, etc. At face value, um, from my vantage point, I think smaller classes are a very important thing. Um, I really do. Um, but the throwing money at it, and notice how throwing money is disparaging. There's so much money invested in schooling. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, just locally here, a few years back, they put an amendment in the bill or in the ballots
Mm-hmm.
where, do the citizens of this area consider that it'd be a good idea to raise funding for teachers and schools and such, and will increase a taxation, this and that. And I voted no,
Mm-hmm.
but the majority voted yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's the thing. Come a few years into it, teachers get paid more by whatever amount. The taxes come through the properties, and as a result, taxes in the area have increased to such exorbitant amounts that people that rent have increased have been increased due to the fact that people that own have been increased, and the vicious cycle has gotten to epic proportions
Mhm.
where people are now in dire straits to an incredible degree. And so, just to wrap this answer up, the fact that the money gets handed to an agency and the agency distributes it according to their thing and hires people, there's a whole industry involved in it.
Mhm.
The expense, that bill, it becomes very expensive for the average citizen of the area, to the point where they're actually, everybody's complaining to this point, but they're the very ones that funded it, so they got what they wished. um,
Mhm.
but I would suggest what some people have suggested, where you have different schools and you give the money to the parents, and the parents with that money get to take their students to the best available according to them school,
Yep.
like a voucher system, removing certain incentives that are more money driven and power driven and more student driven. So if we're gonna um, throw more money at it, why not do it so that the people in charge at the highest of levels is the parents? So that's my only
Well,
caveat to what Jim said.
my response to what Jim said, you just got to there towards the end. To me, this is not an argument for increasing public school funding. To me, this is an argument for school choice. Because as it sits right now, public schools don't have any competition, so they can continue to motor along in mediocrity. There's no incentive for them to be better. When you introduce competition, now they have to compete for that money. Because, like you said, the take that voucher, not any cash. It's not like they're handing a parent $15,000 cash. That ain't happening. It's a voucher to take to this private school that
Did I freeze or
produces.
did Mark freeze?
I don't know which one of us froze, but you're not frozen now.
Okay. Okay, continue. I'm
So
sorry.
it's not $15,000 in cash. It's a voucher to go to this private school that produces good results, and they get the money instead of the public school.
That's right.
Injecting competition into the equation is good for everybody because that does reduce your class size, number one, but it forces the public school teacher to compete
With private
with
schools.
these private school teachers.
Dude, that would be the best thing for kids ever, because
Yes, they would.
it's in the hands of the parents, and the kids could also petition their parents. Like, let's say they put them in a school that the parents think is great, and then the kid says, "Mom, Dad, in this school X, Y, and Z," and maybe they might reconsider, and maybe that might help the situation in specific ways. So yeah,
Well, it would make the public school administration, it
more
would force,
respectable.
well, it would force them to look at the performance of their teachers. They're
Right,
like, look, you're just not doing a good job.
right.
You
So
know,
I would.
the kids who you passed to the next math class scored in the lowest 20%. I don't think it's got anything to do with the kids because they get into this other class and suddenly they flourish. So you know, and competition would do that, Jim. It would a higher standard of teacher. Because if you look at what a private school teacher makes per year versus what a public school teacher makes per year, because private schools don't have to accept anybody. They look for the best. And if you're not producing results, you're out of there. Public school, it's not that way. There are
They'll take.
some dynamite teachers in public schools, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but they are not the norm. They are the outliers, you know?
I
Well,
mean,
We should pay teachers more. If they produce, yes, I agree.
Well, here's the thing with the situation. Not even teachers can afford houses to rent
Hmm.
in order to due to the increase that they got for their check.
Well,
So you see what I'm saying? This thing cycles in because
yeah.
the problem is there's a third and fourth and fifth party involved in the
Mhm.
flow of money.
Well, and let's get back to that money because they are getting what they wanted in lower class sizes because
Not
people can't
here.
afford to live there anymore and they're
Oh
moving
yeah.
to the suburbs and they're moving further out of town where they can afford the rent and the kids aren't going to that school anymore. They're going to another school somewhere else.
Yeah, anytime you include a a a governmental overseeing of they require staffing, so money gets pulled into that
Mhm.
itself. And down the line, everything becomes more expensive because you have these overseers. Um, and
Yeah,
nobody wants to strip anything down because people in these positions have a life with that position, and so it's
sure.
a vicious. Even if they see the problem, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's a very absolutely, Jim. It's a very complex situation, and there are no simple answers. But to continue to do what we've always done just simply because we've always done it doesn't make any sense either. We got to look at other countries and see what they're doing. A lot of people with talking about a lot of programs will say the same thing. Well, look at this country, they do this. Look at this country, they do that. And they like to talk about Sweden and Norway, for example. Well, Sweden and Norway, school choice has been there forever. Talk to a Norwegian parent or a Swedish parent, they can't fathom the idea of not being able to choose the school that their kids go to. They think that that's stupid. You want your kids to go to the best schools possible so they can get the best education possible. And if we have no choice, if we have to send them to this substandard school, forget it, you know.
Yeah,
So let's
yeah.
look at the other countries where that has worked. And now it's up to individual states. And in some cases, it's up to individual counties and school districts to make that decision.
As long as the
But
money be flowing in,
that's what it's come down to.
yeah,
Money
it's
is the power. The power is the dollar. Freedom of the press is alive at the U.S. Mint.
and Pink Floyd was right
Yeah.
in the construction of the wall.
All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
They
We need
were
to
right.
land the plane. It's 2.5 hours.
All right, we'll do this one quick because we got to get everybody back home. So get in the bus, folks. Get in the bus. We're
Two
driving
to a
down.
seat, please. Two to a seat.
We'd like to thank you guys for hanging out. Trampled Underfoot podcast. Your hosts Mark Lindsay, Eloy Escajedo. We go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time here on Trampled Underfoot podcast channel on YouTube, and we have a website as well as a Facebook page. You can check those out under the same name, trampledunderfootpodcast.com and Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. And we're sponsored by
Harneal Media, your web solution. He hates it when I say that, but that's why I say it. I mean, come on. I get so few opportunities to poke this guy in the ribs. I got to take them while I have them. You know what
it's
I'm
like a
saying?
little slogan. We should snap that
Yeah.
everywhere.
I think, yeah, it should be an
Make,
I'm going to make a new banner.
make a little jingle. Make a little jingle out of it. Oh,
Well,
whoa,
you're the
whoa, whoa.
musician, write it. Yeah. Hey, if you're looking to increase or create a web presence, there's no better way to do it than with a website. And Harneal Media can help you with that website. Not only get it all set up for you, they can help you with the normal daily, weekly, monthly maintenance of that website. They are very competitively priced. They can help you set up a web store so you can sell your products or offer your services. And you get 100% personalized service with Harneal Media. When you deal with Harneal Media, you deal with Steve, not some nameless, faceless person in some call center somewhere that you're never going to speak to again. So I encourage you to check it out. There's a link in every video on this YouTube channel to Harneal Media. That's HARNEAL Media.com, sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
What was the saying again that he doesn't like that you said?
Your web solution.
I don't know why. What's the problem? All right.
That's not a big problem. It's just a,
We wish you guys the best. Peace.
all right.